Thank you all for coming. If you could all stand and remove hats, let's do the pledge first. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to let these guys kind of introduce themselves. Maybe Ben from Edgewater Resources.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, we had Scott Berto has been helping the team. He's on his way to his daughter's, I think, lacrosse team made the Final Four, so he's there and go lacrosse. Scott is listening, so don't say anything bad about Scott. He's here. So if you don't know who Scott is, he is one of the best in the business and grant coordinator, and is a large reason why I think you guys have about $7 million of grant projects underway on your waterfront throughout the town and the village. And this is just one of those projects. I'm not going to go too far into all that detail, but so I'm Greg Wykamp with Edgewater Resources. We've been hired to look at the waterfront. We are a waterfront specialty design firm. That's all I do is work on projects on the water, marinas, waterfront development, harbors, ports, all that sort of thing. We're here to try to help make the most of your harbor. Ben Gladstone is in my office here. We also have Diana. Where'd Diana go? There's Diana back there hiding. And Matt from MRB. You want to give a quick nickel tour of MRB?
Sure. MRB Group is an engineering and planning firm based in Rochester. And we support municipalities in kind of activating their plans in particular. That's why we're here on this project to take the great design work that the community does in partnership with Greg and his team and put some hustle behind it to get implementation moving.
Excellent. All right, so we'll just do some introduction here. So there's a lovely view from yesterday. I should have taken one this morning because I actually could see the sun. But I ran out to the lighthouse this morning and ate about 10,000 bugs. I'm not sure what bugs those are. Is that the keep the out-of-towner consultant out of town, I guess?
That's our great protein.
Excellent, excellent. I love it. I love it. Nadir, does that work with the health food? You get the free protein from the bugs? Excellent. So the quick, this process, we'll talk about it. It's all about continuous community involvement. So last night we did a visioning process and we showed you a million pictures and had a really fun discussion about what fits here in Cape Vincent, what ideas we're excited about and what ideas we're not excited about, places we'd like to learn from and maybe grab a little piece of here and a little piece of there and do it a Cape Vincent way here. And so that was last night. Tonight, we tried to take as much of that feedback as we could and turn it into drawings and ideas for you to look at. And some of the ideas are kind of based on sort of small interventions and some of them go all the way up to bigger ideas. We will be back. We're going to take all your feedback tonight. And you may like some of the things in here. You may not like them. I want you to be open and honest about that. We're here to listen and adjust the plans accordingly. And we'll come back with after we refine those. And as we get past that, we're going to talk about an implementation plan. Our goal is to come up with a plan that is exciting. It achieves the goals of the community and it actually has a viable funding strategy associated with it. It's also going to be a long-term plan. Some of these things are things you can start immediately on. We actually have a grant, for example, for the first phase of about $1 million to start construction on something. We'll talk about what that might be. And some of these things you might build out over 20 or 30 years. So that's an interesting process. So the goals of this project for us is really meeting with the community to understand the needs and the culture of Cape Vincent. We're not here to bring any other place here. We're not here to mimic some other place. We're here to we talked a lot about this thing called authenticity, which is the special character of this community or any community, frankly, that you remember. So when you think about those really special places you visited and a year later, 2 years later, there's that special something, that feeling you had, that's what we're after. I promise none of you remember a Starbucks in that picture because that's ordinary, that's everywhere. That's not what this is about. When we talk about the kinds of businesses and activities you want here in Cape Vincent, we all like the local businesses, right? We like the local coffee shop. We don't want any of that other stuff. We wanted to review all the existing reports. A lot of studies have gone on, code implications, all the things. A lot of your waterfront development, for example, was built in another time. The codes and requirements of what we do now, it's much safer, easier to navigate, electrical safety, all those kinds of things in marinas. Everything looks different now. And there's a reason I think you have fewer boaters here now than you might have had 30 years ago, right? And some of that infrastructure out there it's not appealing. Let's be honest. Some of those slips out there, I wouldn't put my boat there. And I'm a boater, I cruise, and you're gonna go to another place. You're gonna go to a nicer dock that has nice power and do different things. Another thing is, Frank, you can't even see your beautiful downtown from the water. A lot of times it's hidden behind structures. So we want to open some of those views up so people can see, hey, let's go there, right? We're going to have a funding strategy, as I mentioned. And this whole process is about you making the decision. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to make suggestions and recommendations and bring ideas. And you guys are the deciders. You tell us that, yeah, that's a good one for us and that one's not so good for us. So our process, as I said, continuous community involvement. You're going to get sick of me showing you pictures of this. You're like, enough already, go build it. Community visioning, we've assessed the site. We've looked at those things. We've got some concept alternatives we'll show you tonight. We're going to refine them next. And then we're going to come back when we're all comfortable with the plan with an implementation, phasing, and funding strategy. So diving right in, our actual focus of our specific is right down here, this little bit here on Club Street. I'm going to kind of stand in your way a little bit. So I turn those lights off so the glare is down a bit. Club Street is really what we are asked to do. But as a waterfront planner and designer, I can't help but go, let's look at the big picture first. Because before we go charging down the path of go build something, we got money, let's go build something. Let's make sure we're building the right thing and putting it in the right place. And that it all leads us one step at a time towards a bigger plan. So the first thing I wanted to step back is you've got a really cool waterfront. You got a big breakwater out here. You've got this main street. You've got East End Park. You've got some great stuff downtown. But part of it is it's not particularly well linked together. If you're in a car, it works great, but not everything. So you've got the intersection down here where the gas station is. Help me with the name. It's Broadway and what's the, I'm sorry? Market. Thank you. I'm sorry. I should know that by now. And then at James there, the intersection with the ice cream and the brewery where you turn to go to the ferry, where the park is, that's kind of, in my mind, I think of that as kind of the heart of downtown of the village. And then way out at the East End, you've got this amazing park out there. There's about $4 million of new stuff being built out there, that fantastic new restroom building. It's got lockers and all that sort of stuff and new docks. All that's happening out there. You know, I've walked it back and forth a bunch of times and I'm pretty comfortable, but it's not a great walking experience between downtown and the East End Park right now. It could be a lot better, but one of the things from a guiding principle standpoint is I think we need to do a lot better job of connecting east to west here and making it a nice, easy walk. You've got a really overbuilt main road. Broadway is too big. It's 53 feet wide and you can have the same exact vehicular capacity in a road about 30% narrower, which costs 30% less money and gives you 30% more green space, 30% more cool stuff in between. And then we have the other connection as we get downtown is that connection out to the ferry, out to our future marina for the transients. And ultimately they have the gateway of all the boaters, everybody coming from the outside, either coming in on the ferry, either coming in other boats. Maybe they'll be coming in on a cruise ship at some point with the dock out to the east. So this idea of this is your waterfront is also a gateway. It's very important. So that is sort of an organizational framework at the biggest scale is something we'd like to talk about. We'll talk more in detail about the road on Broadway later. But that's all intended to give you more space in your downtown to do the things that you enjoy. Have a wider, not a wider street, but a wider streetscape, places for outdoor dining, safer pedestrian crossings, shorter, narrower pedestrian crossings. And I promise you, not 1% less vehicular capacity. All right, your road is just way too big. And departments, are there any civil engineer road builders in the room? Great, I can pick on them. They make the roads way too big. And that's why they go way too fast downtown, right? People drive too fast when the road's too wide. When the road's the right width, people drive the right speed. And we're talking about a little narrow downtown. You don't need to go any faster than 25 through there. So some of the big ideas we want to talk about is this idea of a safe harbor. So a safe harbor from a boating perspective is if I'm on the lake and I'm trying to go from Clayton to Sackett's Harbor and I make that turn and maybe it's fine in the river and then I make that turn and it goes to 8 to 10 foot waves. And being a boater myself, I am capable of sailing in any conditions at all times. But sometimes I have my wife and kids on the boat and I'm like, we're going to turn around and let's go find a safe place to park the boat. I may not have planned that, but if you're a cruising boater, you know that your schedule is at the whim of the weather. You don't tell the weather what you're going to do. If you're a smart boater, you go, let's build in, you always build in 2 or 3 lay days just for weather. So that's one thing, but we also want to have the ability that your harbor is safe for boaters here all the time And there's a lot of opportunities to come in. So one of the conversations is do we have a safe harbor? Part of this conversation, it's easy to overdo and overthink what a safe harbor is. If I have a small marina that's protected, maybe 50 slips, that's fine. That's a safe harbor. But you might also want to have the opportunity for a bigger harbor. And so we looked at that breakwater you have and said, if that breakwater is the start of a safe harbor, and there were some conversations and some suggestions by others that maybe we can connect it to land and get out and walk out and those things. So we looked at some ideas I want to talk through with you. So one of the thoughts was, hey, let's connect the village dock out to that breakwater. It's about 700 feet. That's a long way. But here's the problem. If it was a floating dock and those big waves that come in from the west, any boaters know about the big waves that come in from the west? Sure. It's going to get hammered, right? If I just built that, or if I didn't have something else out here, the wave reflection, like, let me show you another one example. If I built one like this, for example, and just kind of made a turn, in that case, I'm suggesting it ties into where the ferry dock is. And don't get too excited about where I'm connecting this. These are just kind of diagrams. But if I built what you see there, what's going to happen is all that wave energy is going to come in, it's going to hit that wall, and it's going to bounce right back out, and we're going to have twice the waves. The physics of a wave is it's a big sine curve, back to your college physics class. When it hits a vertical surface, 100% of that energy comes straight back. And when that wave comes back, it combines with the other one, and you get this incredible chop, and it would really, really chew up all of this over here. So I'm not going to recommend that. That's a problem, but it does create this cool, this would be great, and this would be terrible. So let's not do that. We need to not do terrible. We looked at another idea. What if we connected way over here to one of the road ends? That actually is a pretty decent plan. I mean, if you had $10 million to extend that breakwater. If you really, really needed this to be a very calm basin, this would be something I'd consider, either that straight one, or maybe we do a curved one. And all that wave energy would glance off and keep going east. That's a good thing. The wave energy that bounces off from the north, we can tolerate that. That would create a huge basin here. If you ever decide you really, really need a big, huge protected harbor in front of your community, that's what I would suggest. I think the ferry would hate it because the ferry is going to have to go way over here. I'm not recommending you do this. I'm just exploring this conversation so you can at least have it in your mind going, we've thought about it, we've looked at it, and maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing. We looked at another one and said, what if we did one a little bit shorter and just extended this over? And now you're starting to see these little circles. They're a little bit faint, but maybe you can see there's a bunch of little circles out there. Another way to do a safe harbor, if I'm just trying to get myself off the lake, I just want to get behind the breakwater and I want to be able to tie the boat off. So I could go on a swing mooring. What a swing mooring is, it's like just an anchor. You see this, you see it a lot on the East Coast. You could put a bunch of swing moorings out there and we'd still calm the basin and we'd still have a nice area. So that could be done, a lot less money. It's another thought. We looked at another one. We call this an overlapping entry, where you have a piece up here and a piece down here. And again, the ferry could move around and do this thing. So again, I'm not suggesting you do this, but we did want to explore this concept of how that might work. And ultimately, it's important to remember that to build a safe harbor, we can build a safe harbor down here. We can build a little bitty one. One of the things I always want you to think in terms of priorities. I think the priority at first right now is let's get a better transit boating environment right on our waterfront quickly. And we can talk about the bigger harbor environment later. I don't want you to start with something like this as a priority and then this takes forever. I'd rather you start here and we come back to that later. I promise you we can design a marina that's safe and comfortable and has a safe harbor down there. So just real high overview on that kind of conversation. Are there any questions about that? I realize that might be a little bit weird. We didn't talk a lot about that last night, but it was something that came up and I wanted to explore. Any questions on this idea of what is and is not a safe harbor? We do want to be a safe harbor because that's a core designation. It will get you some additional funding. It'll help you get some dredging. That is a good thing, but we want to do it in a way that's really smart, and we can do that. So let's talk about some other things. We're looking, so very specifically this project, of course, you all know you're downtown and where we are, there's Club Street. And very specifically, you've got the village dock. That village dock is going to be replaced with a floating dock. That's because the water level changes. I talked last night about water level changes. If you've got questions about that, I can answer that later. But trust me, we do this all the time and we recognize that the water levels change seasonally over time. We've had record highs recently, and we also know about the storm surges. And we do a lot of coastal engineering, so that would accommodate those things. This is changing to a floating dock from another project that's already funded. This is the Trotter property here, but you have grant funding right now that has acquired the old Captain Jack's property, or is very close to. There's still some title issues they're resolving. The acquisition of the red roof structure that's kind of falling into the water has been acquired, and the acquisition of that white house has been acquired. That white house is probably going to be gone in the next couple of weeks, right? It's got a lot of mold in it. It's got a bunch of issues. That's going to go away. You've got the ferry, of course. We all certainly hope that that ferry becomes active again just as soon as possible. And then you've got the property here that is apartments right now. The bottom floor is designed to accommodate some kind of a shop or a restaurant. Maybe we can get to that at some point. So those are the properties we're specifically focusing on what to do with the Captain Jack's, the White House, and this property. And we'll get to that because we have control of that right now. But here's just a few images of what's out there now. That's the existing village dock. And there's the first red one there. The truck property. Now that's really from a kind of current modern standards. If you bought a boat in the last 20 years, we build boats much wider than we used to when this was built. That beam is real narrow in that facility. We've looked at some of the other facilities in there. You're all familiar with this. And then, so that's the Captain Jack's property, which is really beyond saving. There's a lot of conversation, could we save it and turn it into something else? And really that building is too far gone, as is this White House. There's apparently a lot of mold and things in there. So those are gonna go away. And then you've got that structure in the back that is already acquired and is going to go away. I hear lots of tears and gnashing of teeth in the crowd. No, mobilize, save the red thing. Sorry. This is at the what do we call that building? The condo building. Those docks there have been improved because they were definitely unsafe. They've been improved. You've got of course the site you see from the ferry as you come in, and then looking back at this, looking at that roadway. Love to try to clean that up a little bit. Maybe a lot of times when we don't know what else to do, we just keep spreading asphalt until we run into a building. I think we can, over time, we can clean that up a little bit, narrow that. We all know have only the pavement we really need, right? It's easy. It seems easier to just lay asphalt sometimes than to think through some other things. So that's looking back to the south, of course, down James. And then I'm going to show you a whole bunch of images from last night. So we showed a lot of images, and I'm going to show about a third of them that seem to resonate. And so hopefully most of the folks who were here last night will be like, yeah, we like that one. So this is one, and this is important because this particular image it's a little place called Charlevoix. And the reason I show this image is we did a survey of 4,000 boaters on the Great Lakes over in Michigan and asked them to just pick their favorite harbor out of 87 public harbors in Michigan, and didn't give them any criteria. To say pick your favorite, any reason you want, and then tell us why you like it. And this was the #1 harbor. And they all said, what we like about it is it's got great transient docks. It's got a public waterfront edge. It's got a lovely green space, and I can look up and see the shops. Does this sound like Cape Vincent? It's really close. If you think about, right now you've got a wall of stuff and old clutters. But if you could see from the water, some nice docks, a nice edge, look across the village green and look up and see the brewery and the grocery and all those things, you're very, very close to this. And this sort of as a model of what you could be here and how people would experience it is very, very close to this. And we found that, we've looked at other harbors. The #3 harbor was actually one where the infrastructure was so bad, we're completely tearing it out and starting over, but they still loved it because of the community. And so I think you have a real opportunity here to capitalize on what the boaters are really looking for. I want to come up. I want to know that I'm welcome. I want to see very clearly where I'm supposed to go. I want to feel welcome, right? Right now, folks are showing up on the anglers' docks. That's not cool. They want to see where it is, and they want to look up when you get off the boat. You want the kids, get off my boat. You've been stuck in this boat with me for 6 hours, go. But they can run up and see the ice cream shop, and you can look back and they can look back and see the boat. That's a really great experience where people feel really comfortable. And of course, it's not all about the boaters, but in this context, that was important. When we talk about scale of things, the idea of cool outdoor dining, cool umbrellas, really nice little public spaces that can work really well. This was, again, what I heard last night was that people responded well to this kind of imagery, this kind of scale. Maybe not all the detail, but you get the idea. Thinking about things like a food truck. We don't want to compete with the downtown restaurants, You guys have a little festival around 4th of July. I hear a couple of people come to town. So the French Festival overwhelms the community for a weekend or, that couple of weeks. Everybody comes back to be here for that. Wouldn't it be great to have another kind of a festival earlier in the season? Maybe there's a food truck festival, Taste of the Cape, or whatever we call it. Or maybe on Mondays and Tuesdays when the restaurants here locally aren't open, you have one night where the food trucks come in and you have another reason to go downtown. One of the things that's important about everything that we're describing here is talk a lot about the tourism in the summertime because that's our biggest push for the economy. But we want to make sure that in the shoulder seasons and in the winter, that everything we build works for the community. If we build something that's great for the tourists and terrible for you guys for the other 9 months of the year, that's the wrong thing to do, right? We don't want to do that. We want to have that balance. So we talk about parking a little bit. Every great waterfront community has a parking problem. And I assure you, we will never, ever solve the parking problem to everyone's satisfaction because you all know the people. If I cannot park the car this close to the door I want to go into, we have a parking problem. If I had to walk 10 extra feet, we have a parking problem. I'm worried about empty parking spaces in October, frankly, more than not being able to find the closest parking spot in the summertime. But we do need to be practical and make sure we think those things through. We talked yesterday a lot about a more attractive landscape. Still not sure about the palm trees in Niagara on the lake. But this idea that we can have a broader landscape in front of the businesses, a nicer walkway, a nicer landscape experience. This is Skinny Atlas. Just great architecture. You guys have fantastic architecture in this town. I don't know if you really appreciate it. It's probably background scenery because you've all grown up with it and lived with it forever. Coming in with fresh eyes, this place is stunning. This community is absolutely beautiful. I remember coming into Sackett's Harbor years ago and thinking, wow, this place is amazing. And this is every bit as good as that. I just really can't get over it. Some other things about, the sort of outdoor engagement with the water. This is Soda's Point. This idea is fantastic to me, is to have these sort of great outdoor spaces, comfortable spaces. We talked a little bit about the Adirondack chairs in Clayton. They're bolted down. Never bolt down great chairs. There's a psychological thing about people with chairs. They'll come up to in a public space. They'll walk up to a chair, and sit down, and they'll do this. They'll move it an inch this way, and they'll put it right back where it was, and then they'll sit down. But they always move it at least an inch. It's really, we are all funny people. But this idea of letting people kind of move through a space and get themselves situated with where's the sun right now, where's the wind blowing, those kinds of things. So I love this image there. This is an image of a little town in Michigan that really was a transformation. It was a very blue collar industrial town. And like a lot of the Rust Belt cities, all of its industry left in the 80s and every shop in the street was closed down. And after a transformation focusing more on the sort of summer tourism-based environment, this downtown came back. I think that's just an important notion that we've lost some things over the years because our waterfront has really been run down. We can bring some of that back, but do it in a controlled way. What we heard a lot of all day yesterday, we did stakeholder interviews and met with, practically every property owner adjacent to these sites. And what we heard a lot was, we're here because this is a nicer, quieter place. It's higher quality. It's not Alex Bay. It's not the craziness. We want higher quality. We want that great, comfortable experience. And I think that's something you can achieve. Talking a little bit about flexible spaces. We're really good in this country of building really purpose-built spaces. We build huge billion-dollar stadiums that you use 12 days a year. It's kind of crazy. This is a beautiful space in Montreal. It's a perched beach. It's about 18 feet above the river. And those little beaches, that's all sand, and the umbrellas are really kind of cute. During the daytime, it's full of kids playing, just like they're at the beach. But in the evenings, it switches over to kind of a different experience. Now, this is a place where there's maybe a little corporate event or something after a reception, or the old wedding receptions here. Kind of a fun, different way to use the space. It's a great picture from Clayton. I really like these transient docks because when you come up, you know where you're supposed to go. It's really obvious as a boater. I'm a sailor, which means I'm not nearly as smart as the power boaters. They get places faster. I don't make as much noise or smell as bad. I'm picking on power boaters. I like power boats too. Anyway, but this was kind of cool. You do have wave climate issues. We have to be really, really cognizant of the wave climate issues here. You've got big fetch, a lot of wind, and that wave picks up. We need to make sure this stuff works. Kingston. Everybody seems to like Kingston. We talked about what was great about Kingston. What we liked was the sense of how nicely kept things are. You know, maybe it's a little too fussy for some people, but there's a level of effort and care in the landscape and how everything is put together and maintained that I think everybody can appreciate. So, talked about accessible and kayaking. One of the things that in a community like this, we asked last night and we got about a third to half the people here are regularly out on the water. That's really exceptional. In a lot of communities like this, you will be saddened to learn that it's usually under 20%, sometimes as low as 10%. A lot of folks feel like they can't afford to go boating, they can't afford to get out on the water. The reason your ferry is so popular, obviously you can get to cool places, but for a visitor who never goes boating and is never gonna go boating, for that, or maybe those kids on that thing, when they get on that ferry, they're on the adventure of a lifetime. That 5 or 10 minute ride is a big deal. We'd love to get more people on the water, so that could be one of the reasons that a visitor comes to Cape Vincent. Is this is the place where you can go affordably rent a kayak or a paddleboard for $10 an hour. Anybody can afford to get out on the water, or you can rent a boat, or you can get on a boat tour. Having those opportunities for your community to get out on the boat, but also visitors to get on the boat, is a really fun way to get people here, and I'd like to encourage that. Accessibility, we've really come a long way in terms of how do we help folks who don't have all the abilities that we might want to have. You know, how do we get onto the boat? How do I get boating? You know, for a lot of disabled veterans to be able to go kayaking and do some things absolutely freeing. They can get out on a modified sailboat and they're completely free, just like everybody else. And that's really important for us to keep in mind and offer. There was a conversation about a junior sailing program last night. I think that's a phenomenal idea for getting residents out on the water. And this is something fantastic to look out and see the kids out on the opties, out in the basin there, and you've got that protected harbor. You can do it behind the basin, even when the wind's up. Wintertime, your water gets hard in the winter, just like at my house. Let's not forget that you can do all kinds of cool stuff. We talked about, I still didn't find the picture, I should have. There's that marina where those umbrellas are and that perched beach in Montreal, the marina next to it. In the wintertime, they put tents and little sheds in the slips on top of the ice. They plug the sheds into the power and the guys go in there and they fish while they drink beer and watch hockey. That marina makes as much money, they tell me, they make as much money or sometimes more money per slip in the wintertime than they do in the summertime for guys out there fishing, or women, whoever likes to go ice fishing. So that is a really cool idea. So let's not forget that a good chunk of the year, it's a little chilly up here. Thinking about this sort of public edge, we really want to have an edge where people can walk on it. They can walk down a promenade. The boaters can come up. You can see the boats. You can see that activity. Thinking about a cool splash pad, for example. This is a thing that when it's on, it's exciting. When it's off, it's a place you can walk. It's not an empty bowl basin fountain that looks terrible when it's empty and it's full of weeds. In the fall, you turn it off and it just looks like a plaza space. But a really fun little destination and a way to wash off the kids after they've gotten too much ice cream all over their faces. So, talking about some of your streets. One of the things I'd like to think about is when you get off the ferry and the visitors come south and they get on James and they're on Cape Vincent International Speedway heading south to Watertown. Maybe it's like that, I don't know. I'd rather those folks slow down and look around and realize that they're an amazing little community and maybe we can stop them for an hour. And so if we look at James where it hits Broadway, what if we close that street up? Maybe not on a Tuesday morning, let them go. But maybe on the weekends we close that and we let the street fill up with tables and chairs and a band and all those, whatever you guys want to do with it. And those cars have to turn right and drive down and look, hey, look, there's a lovely cup. I need a cup of coffee. If it's morning and my wife hasn't had the second cup of coffee, nobody's talking to her. She has a mug that says at the top, there's a line at the top. When she starts, it says, no. And then the next line says, not yet. Not even close, almost, and you may approach. Let's get folks to look around and go, there's a cool thing to do here. Let's stop. If we can get them to pull over and get out of the car for 10 minutes, we're going to keep them for a little while and they'll leave some money behind, and that's okay. So this could be fun. Just kind of visualize that between the brewery and the ice cream store, for example. There's a couple other cool images. Finding ways to transform your streets to make sure that they work for people. Thinking about this sort of festoon lighting, that's the cool lighting above. And again, if it's a Tuesday morning and you don't need to work, they can drive under it, it's fine. You've been to Larimer Square in downtown Denver, it's a fantastic experience. I want you to have the ability to control your streets and use them how you want to, what's appropriate. When we think about the waterfront, we're going to talk about, changing the way some of these streets work, but always remembering that, If somebody tries to drive their car onto the ferry and keeps going into the drink, you do need to be able to get to them. So thinking about, signs and umbrella tables, this is hopefully fun, and hopefully this is the right kind of thing that maybe this looks for French Festival. Maybe this is something that is something that happens every Saturday night. Could be fun. Thinking about buskers, that was one of the things that came up. I think is it Kingston with the buskers?
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. If that guy messes up, he's going for a swim. Thinking about ways to transform roads. So one of the conversations about Broadway again. So right now, your lanes on Broadway, your travel lanes are 12 feet wide. That is the correct width. You could actually make them a little narrow, but 12 is really standard. So you have two 12-foot lanes. And then for reasons known only to the DOT civil engineers, instead of having an 8-foot wide parking lane, you seem to have like 15-foot wide parking lanes. You can park two cars side by side, and that road is really wide. And that means when you're crossing Broadway, north to south or the other way around, it's a 53 to 55-foot walk. There's no reason for that, right? That's a long walk. And if we just said, we're going to do bump outs, and a bump out, you'll see it on the drawing here. A bump out is when we actually just say, let's have our 12-foot lanes. Don't change the travel lanes one bit. Let's make our 15-foot wide parking lanes 8 feet wide, like everywhere else in the world. And then let's take that remaining 7 or 8 feet on each side and turn it into landscape, turn it into outdoor dining area, whatever is appropriate for the business next to it. Then all of a sudden, when I get to the corner, instead of crossing 53 feet, you're crossing 24 feet. That's a little more comfortable for almost everybody, right? I think about, I've got 15-year-old twins, and my mom still needs to walk them across the street because clearly they're not capable of crossing the street on their own. But she's got a bum knee and she's 87, and 24 feet is a lot better for her than 54 feet. So I think that's important to keep in mind at all times. We can transform our roads. Yeah, it's a DOT road, but it's your road in your community. And they're used to people like us asking them about things like that. So, okay, diving back in. Any questions on any of that? Did I show any pictures of anything that you guys hate? Those are the kind of the better images that I heard last night. Is that generally heads going up and down? Sir.
You just mentioned today closing off Club Street occasionally.
Yep.
We never talked about that yesterday. That's
Yeah.
a great idea.
Okay, we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. So I'm going to show you a whole bunch of diagrams. We're going to talk marinas and boating for a little bit here, because if we get really specific again about what I've been asked to do is looking at just these parcels. And so when we think about boating, this right here, with what we control today, we can build a little marina in there. That's about 8 slips right there. If you see it, it's kind of taking over where that kind of rickety old red roof is going to go away. And we can build sort of traditional slips and maybe get 8 slips in there. That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is flexible broadside, which is what you have over here in your village dock. And I really, really recommend flexible broadside, because that other one, those are 8 30-foot slips. And well, what if a 50-footer shows up? We have to send them to Clayton or someplace else. We don't want to do that. This is more flexible. It's the same number of slips, but I can accommodate a different range of boats, a different size of boats. I could take an 80-footer in there. I could take 240s. I can do all kinds of things. So that's a good strategy. Another way is if I turn it a little bit at an angle, I can actually get a couple of more slips because I can use that angle a little bit. So there's a couple of ways to do it. And when you look at the concepts I'm going to show you the first overall concept using only things that you completely control right now, right? Nothing has to be acquired beyond what you already control. And those options would be considered in that one. The next thing I want to say is, I think it's important to look at this piece of waterfront between the village dock and the ferry, as that really is the area we need to turn into a marina. We need to turn that into your public waterfront. And we've talked to Mr. Trottier about how this might come together, and we recognize that that's not a small thing, but we do think that it's entirely possible for us to design a marina that would be something we can all get behind and build together one way or another. So some of those other ideas might look like this. So this right here, again, is your sort of traditional marina layout. We've all seen this a million times. You walk out the main pier, I've got slips off the side. This is about 50 slips. It's 22 40-footers and 20 30-footers. And again, that's fine, assuming everybody who shows up is a 30 or a 40, or we can let them hang over a little bit. Not the most efficient layout, but it does have the advantage of having those big open fairways in between, which are big open views out the water, which is kind of nice. Another way to think about it is, what if we did flexible broadside? Let's use the existing or the new village dock, have it come up and put long fingers off the side. So then we can use the east side of it, and then we can more boats out here. You'll notice there's some dashed lines there. We could even start to push out further. Of course, if we do that, we need to push out further with the ferry dock because we need to make certain that his boat can always move and that keeps operating. But that also helps us think about that wave action we talked about earlier. So this is a way to do it. This is about 50, what is it? This is about 56 slips. So the same area, and I picked up another 6 or 8 slips. That's pretty good. We can look at that same idea and turn it the other direction. This uses that same exact area, and this actually gets you 62 slips. So from an efficiency standpoint, it keeps getting a little bit better and a little bit better. There's another advantage to this particular layout. When we think about waves coming in and hitting a boat, it's boater comfort, right? If you're on your boat, generally the rule is if your drink spills, it's not comfortable. You're not happy, or you're rocking all night. So if a wave hits the side of the boat, comes on the beam, it can take about a 1-foot wave before it gets uncomfortable. If the waves are coming out of the north, which I think some of them tend to do, and you do get some refraction, that wave off the bow, you can take about a 2-foot wave at the same comfort level. Now, we don't want a 2-foot wave, of course, but the point being is the way the boat is oriented matters a lot to the comfort. The orientation of the boat relative to the waves matters a lot for comfort and also longevity of the docks, and that's important. So here's, again, we went from 50 to 56 to 62. We can start to think about extending those sort of dashed lines you see there. What if we did a hybrid? Thinking about what if I'm going to recommend before you build any of this, you do a wave study, all right? We're coastal engineers, well, actually can model the waves, and we can actually project and figure out what they're going to do and how they interact with what we build. And it seems like, why would I spend a lot of money on doing a wave study? The reason you do that is so you don't end up in a position. There's a place called Port Austin in Michigan that we're working on. They 5 years ago built a new marina, and in 5 years the docks are trashed because they didn't recognize the way the wave climate was gonna. They went from a fixed dock to a floating dock, and in this particular case, the waves were too big. And so now they spent $1 million to put the docks in. They just paid us $100,000 to figure out why they got destroyed. Then they spent $500,000 to take them out. Now they're gonna spend $2 million on a breakwater and then another $1 million to put it back in. That's all bad, but the worst thing is for that community. It's a tiny little community in the middle of nowhere. Their whole entire economy is based on those docks, and they've been gone for 2 years and they're gonna be gone for another 2 years. So it's terrible to have to spend that much money on infrastructure, but it's even worse for that community to lose all that revenue and all that for their shops, particularly with COVID. So we really recommend thinking that all the way through, and that might suggest something like this. So this is just another way to do it, extending further out. And again, you can see we extend the ferry dock out as well to always make sure that he can operate, but conveniently enough for us in the marina, extending that structure out creates a really safe, well-protected harbor as well. So this all these things work together. So this one right here is actually about 86 slips, 83 slips. So the really obvious question you should ask is, how do I know how many slips to build? Well, I don't know yet. So one of the other next steps you would do is a market analysis. We want to make certain that we know how many folks are going to come, what they're going to pay, how much money we'll generate, what's it going to cost us to operate this thing, how are we going to pay for these things. Matt here is going to get you all kinds of money. Between Matt and Scott, we'll get a boat, maybe we can get a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service boating infrastructure grant for $1.5 million. We got 2 of those last week. We've gotten 15 or 16 of those, so that's a really good program. But one of the nice things I want you to think about, if you look at that plan right there, and oops, I'm gonna go the other way. That plan and this plan, the only difference is how far I push that out. So one of the things I would also recommend is you build in phases. Maybe you start with 30 slips, and you do that by building shorter versions of these docks, and then you move out and you move out and you move out. The nice thing with floating docks is you can just keep moving them. So you recommend moving in phases. You don't bite off more than you can chew. I'd rather disappoint a boater or two for a season than have a bunch of empty docks. So something to think about there. So any quick questions on this, or you got a question?
You said make the dock longer.
Yep.
Is it conceivable to add on a 30-foot piece and it's easy to do versus that one that's broadside kind of looks more difficult?
Yeah. Well, that whole thing can move because it's the way it's anchored. So, but we could pick the whole thing up and continue to move it out. So. Yeah, that's surprisingly easy. It's funny when you watch a floating dock system be built, it like materializes out of nowhere in like 3 days because it all shows up pre-constructed. it gets set on the ground in the truck and they start plunking them in the water. And over like a day or two, it just appears out of nowhere. It's amazing. Then they take a long time to do the utilities, but it's cool. So you can move those things around.
So what keeps them from moving? Are there anchors in the
Absolutely.
water?
Yep. There's a series of different anchorage types, and that's a really part of the engineering of this. You might have what we call pile anchors with guide piles. So you have a series of piles and there's hoops that hold it in place. Some facilities use what we call chain and anchor, where there's actually a concrete mass anchor, basically some people call them mafia blocks. You know, it's a block of concrete and you have a chain that ties to it and you set them in certain places. You would go through that engine. That's another reason for the wave study. That tells you how you need to design the anchorage for that particular dock system. So we think that too. Somebody else had a question over here, sir.
Sure. It's also federal water, federal breakwater,
Yep.
for which I have to believe that wave studies were done before they built that.
Yep.
By the Army Corps of Engineers a long time ago, because before the breakwater was there were many things, many ships, many boats that were broken up.
Yeah,
A lot of damage.
absolutely. Yep.
So it was done.
Yep. So we would look at those and we would actually do a refined study right in here, because when we do that study, we're able to refine the engineering to minimize the cost and make the efficiency. So that all comes together, but you're absolutely right. You use all that data. There's a ton of data out there. It's called hindcasting as opposed to forecasting. We do what's called hindcasting, and there's data, there's buoys out there that actually collect all the wave action over time, and we can go back and correlate these things. And then we will often place a new buoy, and we call it tuning the model. We can build the model, and then we use a new buoy to collect current data, and then we refine those things. So it's really important to get that stuff right. So now what I want to do is, having talked about kind of the parts and pieces, we've talked about maybe the way the road works. I'm sorry, this thing's buzzing off on me. We talked about how that road might work downtown. We've talked about how this waterfront might work. There's a park and a bunch of space in between. So I want to show you some ideas and some diagrams. These are real rough. We did all these drawings today. So this is sort of the very first basis plan. This is what do you think of as kind of the minimum? And I'm going to show you the plan without the photograph in the back so you can see it a little more clearly. But what you're seeing right here is this is Broadway. Here's the brewery, here's the ice cream shop, there's the road to the ferry. And then you've got up here, you've got the existing condo building. You've got where Captain Jack's was. These are the Trottier buildings here. There's the village dock and of course the village green. There's 3 homes in this triangle here. So what we're showing you in this diagram, I'm gonna shift to this plan and hopefully that's a little bit easier to see. Is that easier or do you prefer the one with the photo?
No.
A little easier, okay. So what we're proposing in this is trying to say, how do we build up our waterfront? So the first thing we're going to need, and we actually have funding for, is a restroom building. So first thing you want to do when you're a transient boater and you get off the boat is go use a bathroom that is not moving, particularly your kids. And so the idea is we have a little boater services building here, and there's funding for that already. Then we have a little park space, and we have some docks out here. We have fuel dock and pump out and this space here. And we would need to coordinate, of course, with these folks. If that doesn't work out, maybe we hold off on the fuel dock at some point. But you've got the village dock, you've got a new dock here, you've got a new dock here. We're working around the existing things. Not much in the way of a change to Club Street, except what you will see for the folks that live on Club Street is we actually showed a little bit of offset parking to make certain that it's clear where you park and where you don't park. Right now, people just kind of move around and park in the dealer's yard and just stand here, just park in people's yards. Let's organize that a little bit so people know where to go. We didn't make any changes in here, no changes at all to the park, except we made the park a little bit bigger because remember we narrowed the road. And so now the park has 7 more feet on the south side, 7 or 8 feet wider, a little bit more park space. And again, looking at this whole streetscape, all those trees, if I were to zoom in all that, you see those bump outs in and outs and nice clean parking spaces there.
Did you widen this side too, or just the front?
We narrowed everything. So we basically, everything from Market, right? Everything from Market east to what was it, Lee? Yes. Market to Lee would be on this thing. They call it a road diet. It's kind of a funny name, but it's a road diet. We'd skinny that up from 53 feet to like 40 feet. And that all those areas. Once you get east of Lee, it is already kind of there. They just didn't build the streetscape. So there we wouldn't necessarily need east of Lee and west of Market. We wouldn't need the on-street parking so much as we need the open space and where the walk and the path goes.
On any of these, right now, Club Street is a one-way street.
Correct.
On any of these, would you just be closing that off?
Yes, we'll get there in a minute. Yep. So this one, this is a pretty modest intervention. We're really saying, hey, look, if the answer was, that's all great, you've shown us some cool ideas, what can I do tomorrow? You can go start with this right now. You could go out and start on these things. If you decided, I like all that, and I really like this idea here on James of doing that thing, we can add that in. I'll show you that on the next drawing or maybe the one after. But what you're gonna see is these things kind of build on each other. So this is kind of the most basic, most simple interaction here. Looking at the next one, and again, it's a little tough to see, but this is the same place. Since you're all oriented, I'm gonna just jump right to the diagram without the photo. So I think it's a little easier to see. So on this one, what we're proposing here is, of course, the big thing you can see is all the old roofs and the trout marinas are gone. And what we're saying is up here, that's your existing village dock, or actually your new floating village dock on the east side. And then you start to move to the west, you get two new linear docks here. You get another one up there. Those, funny enough, you see those two docks right there. Those two docks are those two docks. So the other thing I don't want you to do is spend money today that you have to tear out and do something different tomorrow. That doesn't make any sense to me. So the idea is, in this case, you're seeing the boulevard making a little bigger. One of the things that we did on both these plans is extend that boulevard and make it a little bigger. I know there's a memorial in there. I think that's really important to protect that. I'm also going to suggest that there might be a better place for that memorial that's a little bit more protected. I've always felt a little funny about memorials in roads. I don't want to be in that space. It's the solemn space. There's something very important about it. I want to get a better presence. So we'll talk about that. Maybe that moves closer to the water. You can see we have a lot of green space on the water now. We have a walkway along that whole edge. That little grid of dots up there in the middle, that little kind of cluster right there, that's a splash pad fountain, for example. So you would come out and you have a 12-foot walkway all around the edge. And that little spot there, there's a cool splash pad where the kids are running around next to the green space. We're showing a boater services building tucked in next to the condo building here. And we're showing Club Street. Now, Club Street here, we've narrowed it a little bit, but you could also say, what if that becomes a festival street where we close it off from time to time? We put up bollards and say, we're going to close it off. It's not for cars today. Today it's for the French Fest, or today it's for the food truck festival. Maybe that's what happens in there. When you look down in here, again, we haven't really touched this very much, but I start to think about opening that edge up and starting to say Club Street. Yeah, it's important. If there's an event, if there's something with a fire truck, the fire truck can always go through. But we've got a lot of space next door. So just imagine coming up to this marina now and looking here, or being here, sitting in the brewery or any of these restaurants or places here, looking across the park and looking out and seeing the water. That'd be pretty cool. I think that's really special. No changes in the triangle. Of course, you guys know changes are coming to the triangle. I got to draw it because that's what I do. So, but this is the key point here is you start and you can start to build these. And again, you can push that out further and that'll work. So any questions or comments on this? Does that make sense?
The boats parking on that dock as it is, are they pulling up sideways?
Side tie, yep, broadside. We call it side tie, just like they do on the village dock now. Yep. So there's that one. Yes.
But they also raft off that dock too.
Yeah, we would not want to do a ton of rafting in here, but if you had a regatta or something, when I do a sailing regattas, and sometimes when we take over marina, we'll fill it up so you can just walk across. Generally, for the most part on a day-to-day basis, we wouldn't want a lot of rafting in here because it's not set up for that, but you could raft to the east a little bit, so there's that. And then the sort of the most aggressive one, and again, I guess you can't really see it all that well on the screen. I'm going to just jump to the diagram. This one kind of goes hog wild and says, let's go all the way. And I want you to remember this. Cape Vincent, how long has Cape Vincent been here? When was it founded? Roughly. Sorry? 18? Oh, there we go. 1895. Right. You've been here 125 years, roughly. You're probably going to be here another 125 years. So I recognize that there's 3 people's private homes in there, and it's not respectful of me to just go, yeah, wipe them out. I am suggesting that sometime over the next 20 or 30 years, maybe that transitions. If this is important enough to the community, you adequately compensate people for property if you're going to do that. But why would you even think about it? You might think about it in the context of this becoming a festival street here, a lot more green space. maybe some of those homes stay. Maybe last night there was a conversation about an art center. Maybe one of those homes becomes an art center. Maybe one of those homes becomes a bed and breakfast. Maybe those I'm not saying they have to go. I'm just saying, making the point of over time, over 20, 30 years, you might think differently about how you use your waterfront. Most important, I really want you to get control of this. And so this, again, it's super important because so much traffic gets here from an emergency egress. We need to have the ability to get through this space and get fire trucks out there in case there's an incident here, and maybe there's an incident here and there's a problem at the homes here, for example. But you can start to see some tents in here. We talked earlier about the memorial. I would love to look at a space like this on the water, and maybe that whole space is dedicated as a memorial. Let's give that space more prominence, more respect, the respect that it deserves. Not to diminish where it is now, but I think about it in terms of, I'd like to have a space. I can imagine a Memorial Day event where there's actually bands and other things happening there. We're still not really modifying much in the way of the park. And yeah, I didn't draw the parts and pieces in the park. We're not suggesting the Village Green change dramatically. This is pretty much just expanding and having the green grow. So, some questions.
You were talking about wave action on
Yes,
that way back when it began, if you extended to the breakwater.
Yep.
You had to get a sharp angle to deflect the waves.
Yep.
Is that angle of extending the ferry dock considered that angle that you were talking about?
It does. It's still pretty well tucked in. It only pushes out about 100 feet. So it's pretty well tucked in, and we can actually design that edge to be wave dampening. I can't absorb it all, but I wouldn't do a hard vertical edge. So that, folks, that's what we were able to come up with today. Doesn't mean those are the only ideas. Those are the ideas we came up with today. And I guess the point is as you look at them, at any point along the way, these ideas can change, but every one of these plans kind of builds on one to the next. And so I guess at that point, we just open it up for questions and comments and so on. Sir.
I don't know what the bushes or trees are meant to represent, but it would be concerning to me that, especially from the southern end of the main drag there, that there's plenty of visual
Absolutely.
freedom to the river.
Yeah.
I mean, are you putting trees in there?
At this point, we're just sort of indicating that there's a nice landscape treatment to the edge, but certainly when you actually design, think of these as diagrams more than designs, that we'd certainly think about that, because you absolutely want to be, when you're having an event or a parade or things that are happening here, you want to be able to look across the space and see the water for sure. So again, it's a diagram, but we do want to have that kind of that awareness. So, sir, in the back.
On the main street.
Yep.
Where you're talking about narrowing the road.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With all this increase, I mean, it's going to attract a lot of people doing it. I mean, it obviously looks gorgeous, but you're really talking about increasing a lot of people coming to vacations. So instead of narrowing that road, would it be considerable to maybe is the road wide enough now that you can convert that to head-on in parking?
You could conceivably do that. You could, yeah, that would be another thought. If it is wide enough that you could do angled parking to get more. If we went through that whole parking exercise over time, next layer of detail, that's something that could potentially be done. And you could still do that while still maintaining that 24-foot crossing. So maybe in a certain area, so for example, right here, maybe instead of making the park wider, you hold that line and you do angled parking there, but parallel on the other side. And so you could have a mix and match there. So that's totally feasible. Yes.
This design here is actually based upon the premise that one of the landowners actually sells their dock and their property there to make this happen. Let's just assume that doesn't happen anytime soon. With the floating docks, are you able to put some in a certain direction and then change them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Later on, just shift them or add. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So you're really flexible with the floating docks versus
for sure.
Dock.
Yeah. When you look at these, we could angle these, move them, turn them, do anything with them. The cost of adjusting the position of a floating dock once it's in place is really not a big deal. The most complicated thing in changing an angle is the way that the gangway bracket works. But in context, that's a pretty minor expense. I would say this, if we think about this, yeah, obviously it would be easy if we could just simply acquire the Trotter properties and just move ahead. That's certainly the fastest, easiest way to do it. Another way to think about it is a partnership and say, hey, look, if we decide that we can build this and we can work together with him as an owner. Maybe he's an operator of this new facility. We can work together. It's called a public-private partnership. So he may stay involved and be an investor. We may actually be able to work together to get that boating infrastructure grant I talked about is easy to give to a private marina as a public marina, for example. So I wouldn't get hung up on that particular conversation right now. The most important thing is, have we figured out the right waterfront, and have we figured out, is it a profitable thing to build? Because I want it to be profitable. A marina like this should be revenue positive. It should bring in more money than it costs to build and operate, period. And there's a way to do that. And so if we can make that work, it's possible we could work with the current owner to do that. And if he doesn't want to be involved in that, maybe he sells it or whatever the process is. But there's multiple strategies for doing that. There's also multiple strategies for how you would operate. If the village owns and operates it there, however the community decides to own and structure it, you could hire an operator, you could hire staff to run it, or say, you know what, we didn't know anything about running a marina. You could bring in, like in Rochester, New York, we built them a marina, and they hired a third-party operator who they're hired to just come in and they run it, and that's all they do. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. So I wouldn't get too stressed or worried about how this gets run and operated. But fundamentally, the next steps in this process is sort of a financial feasibility study where we confirm the market, we confirm the rates, we figure out what it costs to build, how do you get it in here, put that together, how are we going to operate it, what are our operational costs, run the expenses, what are our grant opportunities. Matt's going to tell us how much money we can get. Scott Berto will find us some money. We'll get the boating, try to get a boating infrastructure grant, get a clean vessel act grant, you get a free pump out. You start to add all these things together, and all of a sudden your actual cost to build the marina might be 20 or 25% of the actual cost. And then you go, well, my income is this, my expenses are that, and it works. Or I get through that study and find out that it doesn't work and we have to reconfigure. So those are the kinds of things, those are the rational next steps you take in the process. Yeah.
So would this be somewhat deep dock too?
Deep dock.
To handle bigger sailing?
Yeah, I would generally, my boat draws 8 feet, so I draw everything to take my boat. I don't like to park my boat by braille, hitting the bottom. Generally, what I would recommend is we think of low water level and then making the water when we're at record low, we want that water to be at least 8 feet deep and preferably 10 feet deep. Now, right now, you're below your long-term average, so your currently would be about 12 feet deep. So.
I think we want to encourage more.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
really pretty for people to see.
Yeah. Well, another thing we haven't talked much about, and you don't see a lot of them, but there's a new class of boat on the Great Lakes called the super yachts. And those are the big 150, 200 footers. And some of those boats draw 14, 15, 16 feet. The biggest ones, 400, 500 footers. I'm not kidding, personal private yachts. Yeah, I think I showed you last night that marina in Chicago, that big 1,000-foot marina, it's $103 million. It's the biggest infrastructure project I've ever personally been responsible for designing and delivering to a client. It's a big project, $103 million. We also have a super yacht maintenance facility that we built in Puerto Rico. The first boat that showed up was a boat called Luna, 300 feet. The boat was $350 million. One boat was 3.5 times the cost of a 1,000-foot marina. This is a whole crazy different universe. When you see one of those super yachts come to your town, I want you to visualize $100 bills flying off the back, spreading all through town. You could easily accommodate 150 or 200 footer in here, and they're out here. Last summer, maybe not last summer, the summer before, there was a 260 footer that came up from the Caribbean and cruised all through Erie, Ontario, Huron, and Superior. I would love for them to have a lovely place to stop by here in Cape Vincent and visit your shop. Sorry?
They get them now in Clayton.
Yep, they're there. Yep. You'll see, well, I've never seen one here. It's because you don't have a big enough dock yet. So, yeah.
Two things that carry off topic. We talked last night about a kayak launch. I was wondering, are these fingers going to be suitable for fishing?
So generally, we don't want to mix fishing with the boats because that's kind of one of those conflicts. Now, I would suggest that we think about either the new road ends, there's road end improvements, or maybe we think about specific areas and key spots where we nestle in a kayak launch. Generally, we don't want people fishing off the docks because they get hooks and lines, and it's an unpleasant conflict. I don't know how you guys manage it now in the village dock. I'm sure if it's empty and in the morning and people want to fish, they do. But generally, when it's active and heavy boating season, you wouldn't want to mix those two. Sir.
I know last night you had mentioned that this would be taking place over the next 2 years. So how are you going to manage what portion of the year you'll be breaking ground so it doesn't
Yeah, for
disrupt,
sure.
our tourism season?
Yeah. So when I talk about the next 2 years, I'm talking about that, just to be super clear.
Okay.
The stuff we control now, assuming this is what we choose to do, but you could start all of this tomorrow, quite frankly. So your fundamental question about when to build things, we have about 100-day boating season. We really, May 1 to Halloween at best, and those last months or early months are only for the crazy people, fishermen. So we would figure this out. I would want to start construction no sooner than Labor Day and absolutely be done by April 1. That's usually that's what we try to do. And yes, I realize it's cold in between those months, but we make that work because fundamentally, we have been we've done 400 or 500 marinas over the last 30 years. My firm has. In the last 10 years, we've probably done 100 marinas. We never close a marina in the summertime unless there is no choice. We may open the marina without utilities. We might do some things, but we make sure those docks are open, period. The only time we close a marina in the summertime is if it's simply unsafe. We've had situations where that one in Port Austin I mentioned, where it's just too damaged for people to be on. It's not safe. Or electric safety is a big deal in older docks. We actually went on a marina in a place called Harrisville. We actually opened up a floating dock and looked at the wiring connection, and the whole inside of the dock was charred. There had been an electric fire that nobody even knew about. And they wondered why the electricity didn't work. We're like, because you're turning it off for the rest of the summer. And sadly, we found it in May, and we didn't have any funding to deal with the problem until September. And we said, I'm sorry, you have cold docks and come cold docks when you have no power. You just have to do that. So I recognize that's uncomfortable, but people getting injured is much more uncomfortable. So yeah.
Well, what kind of funding do we have to accomplish even the first phase that we talked about?
You currently have, it's about 1.2. You get that number?
1.2 with about 850 is
Good point.
actual grant.
Yeah.
The purchase of Captain Jack's is the 25% matching funds. We also bonded for $1 million. We have about $800,000 of that left. So at this point, we're looking at about $2 million.
Yeah.
So we can definitely do first phase.
Plus the DASNY grant, which is the tear down of the house and tear down of the boathouse, is an additional $250,000.
So,
And just a point on the disruption, right now, there's no access to anything. What we control, you can start tomorrow and you're not going to affect any docking.
mhm.
So I just want to make
And that doesn't
there's
include,
no docking in front of Captain Jack's now.
that doesn't include the funding for the village dock, that's separate funding.
That's a whole different, right.
And the town does have 25%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were to start down this path right now, you basically, this is already funded. And you've got about $2 million to do this. You might not get the fuel dock for that. Would you see how that all plays out? Fuel docks are expensive. But you could certainly get this first dock in. You could there's funding for the boater services building and these improvements here. That's, I think, reasonably within that budget.
So, and what's the time frame for that budget? Are we got to get approval for plans and whatnot, or is it more?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what we're trying to accomplish tonight is if everybody looks at this and says, this is a great idea, then these guys are going to really get into the nits and grits and come back with plan design, do the wave studies and
That could theoretically be done before Labor Day?
Not this summer. I think what you would,
That's right.
so here's, so as much.
your portion.
Yeah. If the question is let's just say we all agree, hey, let's go build this. Let's build this dock and this stuff here. Maybe fuel, maybe not. Let's build this. One of the things I love about New York is your high taxes spread lots of money to be reinvested in your communities. I'm going to stop with the politics there, but however you like it or not, at least there's a lot of money being invested in your communities. The other layer to this is the whole seeker process, the environmental review process. In another state, I could be under construction on this fall. In New York, it'll be the following fall because it's another year. DEC is a real stickler. Now, and to be fair, this to me, it would be, now I guess since we're not impacting, we could be building that next summer because we're not interrupting any existing dock. So you could be under construction on this sometime next summer and even conceivably have it open at the end of the year. We'd have to, it's really a permitting question. Somebody mentioned the Corps and the Federal Nav channel. That's a big deal. We do it all the time. Generally the Corps is super collaborative. They work well with us. DEC, they're a challenge. They hold a really high standard, and I think there's value to that. It just takes some time.
So the breakwater is deteriorating. Is there
The
any-
big outer breakwater?
Yeah, do you have any clout with the Corps to get them to fix it?
No. I've actually been to the Pentagon in the office of the senior civilian responsible for the Corps, trying to figure out how do they fund things. We have another project, a 5-mile stretch of waterfront, which a Corps project has done so much sand starvation that they're wiping homes out. And in the process of trying to avoid a lawsuit and negotiate a settlement with that, we actually got to meet with that individual. And generally, the Corps has no problem building stuff. This is a group of people whose their ambition is to go build cool things. They're builders. Their problem is funding. So it's not the Corps you have to ask, it's Mr. Schumer and those folks. So I remember he's got the money, whatever you think of him, he's got the money. I remember in Rochester, we had the same situation. There was a piece of property and we literally had Mr. Schumer's there. We were talking about how to get funding to get stuff built. So the Corps, the issue with the Corps is never going to be, are they interested? Is do they have the funding and more importantly, the authority to spend that money on that particular project? And there's a thing called the WRDA bill, the WRDA, Water Reclamation something or other, maybe you remember what it is. Anyway, that bill, fortunately for us, for all the Great Lakes, particularly smaller communities, previous to the most recent WRDA bill changes, all of the funding for the Corps maintenance was based on tonnage. And so the previous threshold was 1 million tons of cargo a year, and they were bumping it to 2 million to get funding. That would have taken Buffalo out of the funding stream. When the WRDA bill came through, they then treated the entirety of the Great Lakes as a harbor, which is a good thing for us because that means every little person on the Great Lakes, including you guys, potentially has access to. That was a very good thing for communities like yours. So then it becomes a question of, quite honestly, whatever you think your politicians, they're the ones you got to talk to because they're the ones who have to shake the money loose to the Corps, and then the Corps will not get in your way. They'll get out and get after it. That's what they like to do. So back there, sir.
In each one of your phases of drawings is the center court, I forgot what it is.
Yep,
Is it the same size in each one of those?
it is. Yep.
Because it kind of looks like it's moving.
It's because of the way I took the pictures. When we scanned this properly, I literally stood on a chair and took a picture with my phone. So the accuracy is a little, there's some parallax in there. When we scan these properly, they'll all overlay nicely. And moving forward, we'll do nicer drawings too.
You've got the phase one, the right floating dock cornering off of that marina thing. Is that going to create a problem in that angle?
No, in here, yeah, obviously we can't get all the way in there. We'd lose a slip in there. We'd have to only go as far as we can go.
But you have rights to get it there?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Or as you suggested, we could turn the thing for now in this phase and turn it later. So that's one of the real advantages of the floating is I showed it this way specifically because I wanted to make the point that I want you to see the progression of phases turning into different things over time. And again, some of these things are going to be so far in the future that you'll continue for this plan to evolve based on how you want your community to work. So there was a question behind you, I think, or somewhere back here. Anybody or over here, ma'am?
Quick question. All your landscaping that you're showing, your streetscape, that's all separate funding and
Yep.
separate design, right?
Matt, you think there's some funds maybe for that, right?
Yes, the funding for the projects we're talking about now, what they call the LWRP, the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. When you teed yourself up for that funding, they ask you to kind of draw a district to show what you consider your village's waterfront area. And whomever drew that district or approved it had the foresight to include Broadway in that district. And so there's a real opportunity to leverage some LWRP funding to support that. But it would be a second application. Remember, for those of you who were here last night, we talked about phasing this out. And what the LWRP likes to see is, hey, they got Club Street done, they got it done really well. What's your phase 2? What's your phase 3? What's your phase 4? So in all likelihood, the plan that comes out of this conversation will show exactly that. Here's, the streetscape might be phase 3A, and phase 3A, we go to LWRP and say, look, we did phases 1, 2 within budget and schedule. We'd like to go for phase 3. The great thing about that funding source is that it's typically 75%. They'll typically pay 75% of eligible costs.
And I just like to piggyback on Matt's. We're in the final stages of our LWRP. We started it almost 4 years ago. Should be ending this year, September, October, and there is multiple projects involved in that, which, as Matt mentioned, will open up a lot of new funding sources. And when we first started talking about Club Street during my tenure on the board, some of these schemes go back 30 years. We made the commitment to borrow $1 million. When we made that commitment, everyone started to take notice and start to listen. We then applied for that $10 million downtown revitalization grant. We were one of the finalists. We didn't get it. They didn't make it available last year. We are reapplying and critiquing our application for this year. So keep your fingers crossed on that. That could bring all kinds of new opportunities for local businesses along our downtown area, along with our municipalities. From that application, the state said, these guys are serious. They picked that project out of that $10 million grant and funded the 1.2 million. So that's where that came from. Because we went through and invested the money to apply for the 10 million. We didn't get the 10 million, but they were impressed with the project. That's where that came from. So it's like a snowball. The more you do, the more opportunities you're going to get to bring in more funds. And as these guys talk about phases and stages, look at the big picture, and this might be a small piece, but with what the village has got going on in our local, the town and village LWRP, there's a lot of opportunities coming our way. It's good stuff.
Sure.
Another assumption I'm wondering is, does the shoreline stay exactly where it is, or can it move out, or?
Okay.
What does it have to do with the actual line of the shore?
You're asking good questions. So in the world of permitting, if I make the water bigger by actually pulling the land back, that's a pretty easy permit to get. If I want to put one shovelful of dirt into the water, everything stops. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just really, really hard. So I actually straightened it out and actually clipped it back just a little bit to clean up the edge. But generally, in the Great Lakes, if you walk out into the water up to a beach and you take a shovel under the water and you grab a shovel full of dirt out of the water, you cannot put it back. You're breaking the law if you put it right back where it came from. So generally, we try very hard to not do that. If you look at that marina we built in Rochester, we excavated 100,000 cubic yards of regulated fill from an old steel mill to create water. That was, from a permitting standpoint, was a cakewalk. Had we tried to build a peninsula out, that gets really hard really fast.
So as you're looking at a bigger picture, is one of the phases that you would recommend more of a walking connection between Easton Park and this area?
100%. That's that very first diagram we did, that the connections from Market to Lee would be that road diet, but then you keep right on going with that sidewalk connection all the way to East End Park to your new restaurant facility and all the new stuff out there. 100%. It's a great, it's not that far. It's like a half a mile, but it feels longer because right now you feel like I'm in the grass, I'm in a parking lot, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be. A nice, beautiful walk, at least on the north side, for example. Start on one side, get it on the other side when you can. But that'd be great. So maybe a bike lane, I don't know, all those sorts of things. You'd think these are big, broad ideas. The next layers to all of these have their own layers of feasibility with traffic studies and all these kinds of things. But there was a conversation earlier about are we increasing traffic? You've got plenty of road capacity with your lanes. So that's great. And then just as a reminder, even though we're talking about narrowing things up, we're not taking one bit of actual capacity away from what you have now. So.
highway, Route 12 is part of the Seaway Trail. Then you can have a bike lane because there's no bike lane now.
We got room for bike lanes.
Yes, but there's nothing now, and
For sure.
it is part of the Seaway Trail that goes all along Lake Ontario.
For sure. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm gonna get you at 15 minutes early. I owe you 15 minutes from last night because I kept you 15 minutes late. Sir.
The issue of parking was touched on earlier. Again, we're visiting someone that's sitting in homeowners right on Broadway in that immediate district. In the summertime, the parking does become a challenge.
Yep.
And I'm just curious whether there are any plans that are being incorporated into this to increase parking capacity within a short walking distance.
Sure.
Business district. And I'm pretty certain that you can't have diagonal or perpendicular parking on.
Depends on the classification of the street.
Well, it's a state road.
Yeah, exactly. That's a classification there. So the short answer is I don't recommend increasing the amount of parking in your downtown. I recognize that we had a conversation about Charlotte last night. Charlotte's the neighborhood at the north end of Rochester, and I can show you the drawings. They have solved the parking problem so well that all of their businesses are gone. So there it is. 1,400 parking spaces. Problem solved. Except on a Wednesday night and a Saturday. On Wednesday night, it's fireworks or music, and on Saturday, it's the other one. And
not what I had in mind.
I'm making a point here. So they did all that, and then we proposed a master plan to say, wouldn't it be cool if you had a marina in there? Which of course that marina had been proposed for 50 years. And they're like, you're taking out funny enough, that's only about 200 parking spaces worth. And funny enough, I'm like, you realize you've got 6 empty storefronts. You've got the LDR char pit, which I will tell you, if you ever go to Charlotte, you got to have the steak and eggs at the char pit. It's a classic greasy spoon. I love the place. You got an ice cream shop and a bar. You would think that close to a absolutely stunning beach that you would have a really super vibrant street with all kinds of cool stuff. You don't, because it's a parking lot. So this, I'm exaggerating. It's way, way more, but this is before and this is after. And I think most people prefer after, before, after, before, after. I'm happy. Most people are happy to give up a little parking to have that. And now, by the way, that was all behind fences. And that's all. The reason I was only a couple hundred because half of that parking lot was secured behind a fence from the fast ferry, and they never opened it up. So point being is, in a small town like this, as I said, you will never solve the parking problem because for the vast majority of Americans, we're doomed as a species, particularly Americans. I lived in Colorado and I'd go to Rocky Mountain National Park. And I would drive 6 miles through Rocky Mountain National Park to get to the end of the trailhead to go to 10 Mile Lake. And it's called 10 Mile Lake because the trail to get to 10 Mile Lake is 10 miles. And you would get to that parking lot for that trail and you'd watch people circling in the parking lot to get closer to the trailhead to go on a 10 mile. At some point you kind of go, this is a problem I can't solve. Short of teleporting every person going, my car is exactly where I want it to be. I can't park anywhere here. Now they'll drive to Watertown and they'll go to the Walmart and they'll park the distance that's farther from Market to Lee. And they have no issues with that at all, but they'll come to your town and have to walk 1 block. And I can't believe nobody can park in this town. I'm going to ask you to seriously consider, don't wreck your town for the sake of a problem you'll never solve, because no matter what, they will complain about your parking. It's like boaters with their slips. No matter what you charge us, you're going to complain. My boat is so pretty, you should pay me to come and put my boat there so you can look at it. Anything less than you paying me is way too much. You'll never solve that problem. So let's recognize, let's be practical. We get residents, we have a parking solution for residents, let's solve that. But for our visitors, let's create a downtown that's so cool that they'll walk a block. And boy, that experience of walking the block past this beautiful shops and this cool, interesting stuff is worth it. And I just strongly encourage you to keep that mindset. Let's not take away any parking from downtown or take away as little as possible, but let's not add a bunch more. If we need to add more for festivals, let's look at a remote solution a few blocks back. There's a lot of dirt between here and Watertown. There's very little between here and the water. And let's not use that really precious land along the water for cars that people are going to get out of and leave. I didn't talk about something else that I think is really cool about this. Another way I want people to think about using these docks here. Sorry, going really quick. So when you see this transit, a lot of times we think about transients as somebody who comes in and they're on their way from who knows where, from the east of here to Rochester or Sackets Harbor someplace, and they stay here for the night. There's a whole other group of boaters that live here in the area, and I'd rather get in my boat and come downtown to go to the shops and restaurants in my boat, because that's a fun way to do it. Let's go out to dinner and go down in the boat, hop in the boat, go down the river and do that. Come here for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Every single boater who gets in the boat in their trailers down at Easton Park, and they go out in the lake, they come back. When they get in their trailer, everybody's like, oh, well, after they're done fishing, they'll come downtown. Well, and then you do boating with the trailer, back the truck in, you get the boat in the thing, you're in the car, have to be in the truck driving away. I'm gonna go park this thing with a trailer and now get myself downtown? It's not happening. They're going home. What's the joke? You know, the fisherman with the trailer shows up with a $20 bill and a change of underwear, and he goes home with both. Yeah. They just don't. They come here, they use their lunch, they go fishing. When they get back in the truck, they're going home. What I want them to do is on their way back in is go, hey, let's hit the brewery. They pull in here before they pull the boat out of the water, park the boat for a few hours, come into town. Or, hey, we're out on the water and the kid's thirsty, hungry, needs a bathroom, needs an ice cream cone. We've been out playing on the river. Let's give them a place to come for a few hours, park the boat, come into town, spend a little bit of money before they take their boat out. If you're a visitor to town, somebody was talking about building some cool new cabins and VRBO stuff here in town. But I bring my boat. Well, I don't want to have to put my boat in and out every day in the trailer. Let's put my boat in, and for the week, I'm going to keep my boat here, and I'm going to walk down from wherever I'm staying. We should think about other ways for the way to leverage this facility to work with your boat launch. And let's get those folks to come to town a little bit. I'm picking on these guys. I pick on everybody because I do all those things. But anyway, sir.
In this design, I kind of harped yesterday about having a little picnic roof and a picnic table downtown, and I'm not necessarily seeing one, but could we?
Part of the boater services building, there's a little trellis shade structure out there right on the waterfront. Oh, I didn't even mention playgrounds. We'd put in a playground to be there next to the splash pad and things like that as well. So not much detail on these. We had to draw fast. So just me and Ben. So who's up there, sir?
Yes, sir. All night you extended down to Lee Street.
Okay.
Now there's one more block of commercial property there. So my idea is, I have a business there. I want to see the downtown extended down for one more block.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the Google Earth here.
In the development of that empty lot, if that people do to sell it,
Mm-hmm.
there's all sorts of possibilities. One, for new businesses, 2, open space, picnic areas, whatever you like. So that's something to keep in mind for the future. I know we're not going to talk about it except Club Street.
Sure.
But for the future, that's an idea.
Absolutely, and the LWP may have some of that in there. I'd prefer them.
All the way to East End.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. Absolutely. Yep.
When you were referring to Lee Street, you were simply referring to where the road is wider and needs to be narrow,
Yeah.
not that we would connect from East End to Market.
Correct. Yeah, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that, but absolutely, you want the connection all the way to East End, but right now you've got the sort of 53-foot wide is between Market and Lee. And that I'd shrink down, and then east of there, I'd focus on those other connections. But by all means, if there's a way to extend the shops and businesses and that kind of activity that fits with the character here, I wouldn't put in McDonald's or anything. I'd put in, whatever our cool local businesses are that support Cape Vincent, put those in there for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
It's 7:56. I got 3 minutes. Everybody good?
Good
Are we
job.
on the right track?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. So just so you know, the next step